Hi, I'm Reggie Turner. I'm here with Jim Miller and Terrence Moore. The FlipSide starts right now. Welcome to the show, and welcome back to our election 2022 coverage. Gentlemen, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Well, let's jump right into it. Our listeners and our viewers are waiting, correct? But let's start with some of the Senate races, and let's start with District 1. In that race, we have Mike McKay, who is currently the delegate of District 1C.
Correct.
Jim, what say you?
Yeah, I'm a Mike McKay fan. Quite frankly, I think that his platform is reasonable. I think he has proven to be a very engaged and engaging representative. I think that he has, to the extent possible, brought home the bacon. And if all of that doesn't matter, he's got a tie that's the Maryland flag that is just awesome. I really want one of those. Good guy, bottom line.
Terrence.
I can't say anything that would have me not vote for him. You know, if I had that potential to do so. I think serving as a delegate, I believe also he was the president of board of the county commissioners for Allegheny County. I know personally I've done some work with him with the Homeless Coalition that he's done some work behind. What I can say is a great communicator as far as his team getting out information when he's in legislative session as well.
So you get his newsletter.
I get his newsletter. I definitely get his newsletter. I think he's going to be a strong candidate for the position. He also doesn't rock too many boats, right? Which, you know, is not a bad thing. You know, is all the time. You don't have to have the headlines all the time. A lot of times, it's just about doing the work. So,
well, but here's the other thing: he's a small business owner, and you know, anyone that's owned a small business says, well, many that I know that have owned a small business say to me that you don't understand business till you've had to make payroll on a Friday, and I got to tell you, as a small business owner, that is absolutely true, because it can be the most terrifying time in the world if the cash flow isn't there and you say, okay, what do I got to transfer over from my personal account or my personal savings to make payroll this week, and more importantly, when can I get it back? Because the checking account for a small business, or for any business, is supposed to be higher at the end of the month rather than lower. That's the way we know we've made a profit. And I think that that experience as a small business owner, I think it's important. He's a family man, very committed to his family, from what I understand. He's got a lot of his platform around health, specifically dental health is the one that he brings up a lot. Mm-hmm. But that's another thing. I think that's an underreported issue in our state, and frankly in our nation.
I am not remembering, but do either one of you remember, where was he in this going to West Virginia stunt? Was he involved in that? Was he a part of those negotiations?
I don't remember.
I think that's a good thing, right? You know, if he was, I don't think he was one that was standing out front.
I mean, obviously Weibel got all the attention in regards to that dust up, especially the way that he went after Corderman there, kind of threw him under the bus in the newspaper, if I remember correctly at that time. Well, if we don't remember, then voters will probably have a shorter memory than we do, right?
Yeah, I agree. I think that's across the board, right?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, voters, we as voters, and I mean I single myself out, it's about what's most recent in your mind. Have that recent bias on what's going on, what just happened, how has my life recently been impacted. I don't think too many people go back 4 years to kind of run through every vote that
Right.
that they made when they were a delegate, and kind of see where they stood on each point, or scroll down social media to really find out. Though you can nowadays, and that's the due diligence if you choose to do so. And that's why I think when you look at a lot of their web pages, they do a lot of reminding you of what they did across their career, to kind of point out. Now, of course, they're not going to celebrate their faults either.
No.
But I think it just kind of, just at a glance, when you talk about prior to serving in Maryland General Assembly, he speaks to what he's done for the Board of Education, Board of Health, Task Force on Child Abuse, Mental Health Advocacy Advisory Board, and Social Services Board of Directors. And those are some real key areas. And what we're seeing a lot is a lot of candidates putting out what they stand for, but they don't have the work to back it up.
Right.
And not saying that, you did tremendous work, but at least you've been close enough to it and involved in it to have a finger on the pulse of what's going on, what's needed, and how to engage. So I think that speaks to his credit there, and may help him out.
And one advantage that he may have is, since he is already serving in the House of Delegates, he can show himself doing the work, right?
He
while
can.
he's campaigning.
He can.
Because I'm looking at his page, and obviously he's joined the effort with the governor and others, where they're pushing the comptroller to do something in regards to the gas tax. They've
Right.
renewed that fight in regards to the gas tax, and obviously he's jumped into that fray.
And oh, by the way, he's got 8 kids. So he already knows how to manage chaos. I've got 3 and know how, so I'm quite confident that with 8, he knows that as well.
Yeah.
But like you point out, is it's easy to show you're doing the work when you have a position.
Right.
When
Well-
you're sitting in the chair, even as things come up, you have ability to show people that you are engaged. But when you're not, and you don't hold a seat, and you're running and you're campaigning, you can only speak to what you hope to do. That's why it's important for so many candidates who don't have the resume right now to at least have a strong plan.
Right.
Well, and that's a key for me too, because when I look at candidates, especially new candidates that come on the scene, the candidates that glop onto issues and try to make hay out of talking points that others have developed, that really just turns me off. I want somebody with original thoughts and original ideas, and I want somebody that is not afraid to have a platform that may be slightly different than others. And I think the dental example is a good example with Delegate McKay.
And on the Republican side that he has, there's 2 opponents that he has. The first is Jake Shade, who is the president of the Allegheny County Board of Commissioners. Now,
Right.
I have seen from his Facebook presence, he is a bit of an attack dog.
Oh,
right?
he is absolutely.
He goes after Mike McKay quite often.
Don't let that smile that he's wearing in all of his photos fool you.
And Jake was elected to the Allegheny County Commissioners in 2014. He served as a president since 2015. He was reelected in 2018. Just like every other Republican running, everybody's a conservative Republican.
Yeah.
Like, that's the only thing that you can be right now, right? You have to be a conservative Republican.
Well, I don't think that's true, but okay. I mean, I don't think the suggestion that you have to be a conservative Republican to get elected is true, but I think we have a reasonably but not completely conservative governor, and he did well in the last 2 election cycles, as memory serves.
But the conservative now means different things to different people.
Well,
right?
okay.
Because a lot of Western Maryland sees Governor Hogan as a rhino and not a conservative Republican.
You know what? Yeah, call him what you want. I call him successful.
Yeah, I think using the word conservative right now is picking a side on the same team, right? It's conservative. It is like being on a football team. I play offense, I play defense. We play for the same team ultimately, but there is some opposition there, and I think that kind of draws the line and kind of really is a trigger word to say what I stand for. If you consider yourself a conservative, I'm a conservative. Vote for me. That's pretty much what your tagline should be, right? So,
but there's 2 things that you have to mention if you're a Republican. You have to be a conservative, and anyone that is aligned with you is a patriot.
Exactly.
There you
Right?
go.
Those are the two. Those are the two buzzwords that you have to use. You're not a patriot because you serve your country and you serve it well, even if you ideologically oppose. But if we agree, then you are a patriot.
Patriot, right.
Yeah.
But that's marketing as well. You know, you're saying you're a patriot, so you're implying that your opponent is not.
Right.
Right. You shouldn't have to bring it up if your opponent is all. So I think that's also some marketing, some campaigning, some trigger words to kind of set yourself apart and not directly villainize your opponent. But you pointed out some attacks that you may have seen from this candidate, but this is also the opposite side of being in the seat, because you're in that seat, so you've had to make decisions that people don't agree with. So you're also putting yourself in a position where you can be attacked
For your record.
For your record, and someone doesn't have to have any experience at the job.
But the other thing about Shade, though, Shade is self-employed.
He is, and that I will definitely give him credit for that.
He's in the insurance. I mean, he's a younger guy, right? He just graduated from Allegheny College, so he's very familiar with the area. He's not like Terrence running for office. He's a transplant from New York.
Right.
Those New Yorkers coming down here to Maryland.
Right. One of the things that I was not a fan of that Mr. Shade had suggested is that we in Western Maryland are not getting our fair share. And with all due respect, and there are certainly things on my bucket list, and I'm sure there are things on your bucket list that we'd like to see in Western Maryland, and they all cost money. But we, Western Maryland, are net takers.
Yes.
We do not pay in as much in tax revenue as what we get back in services, and not by a little. And I would argue that while there are things on my bucket list for Washington County and Western Maryland, I would argue that the last actually couple or several governors, starting back with Bob Ehrlich, have been very friendly to Western Maryland. Bob Ehrlich certainly was. Governor Hogan certainly has been.
Right.
And quite frankly, Governor Hogan's predecessor was as well. So, and Democrat, Republican, I think we fared pretty well.
Yeah.
My opinion.
And other thing, looking at Shade, although he is just with the county commissioners in Allegheny County, it also says here that he spent 2 years full time in the Maryland General Assembly. So even though he hasn't served in that capacity, it would seem that he would have a working knowledge of how things work in Annapolis. He wouldn't have the head start that Mike would in regards to all the relationships and things that he has there.
No, and again, looking at some of his key points that he's kind of driving home, he talks about the animal shelter. Everybody loves babies and pets, right? So that you got to pull that in. The work he's done funding the Allegheny County Animal Shelter. He does rattle off a lot of work done around COVID, from reopening schools and bringing in money, economic development and broadband initiatives, all great initiatives, but were they really his?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, money was being dumped on the states, and you're really claiming that?
I'm not. I just kind of point that out. You see that it's a win. You were in the seat while it was happening. All right, so you want to take that on. He talks about the antiquated liquor laws, including Sunday sales and regulations for breweries. But where I think he hits a real good point, honestly, and where is mental health.
Yeah, I did see that. Yeah.
He does talk about expanding mental health and getting school resource officers in public high schools, especially in this current environment right now. I think that's where he should turn his attention. All right, I think that's where he can really get some headway. But again, outside of expanding, what's the plan? Right, expansion is great, but how do you plan to expand? Who are you going to work with to make that happen? What's your timeline? What's your milestones? Give us some goals. And again, I'll beat up on this again. I think a lot of candidates struggle to do that because they don't want to be held accountable if elected.
Yeah. Now, this District 1, what parts of Washington County do that cover? Are you familiar with that, Jim? that kind of your Hancock's liver?
Yeah, I'm not sure with the new legislative map. I don't have that committed to memory yet.
And I don't believe it affected that district at all. But that's something that we can follow up.
Yeah,
But obviously, it's the westernmost part
The
of the
Western,
county.
yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
And then go ahead, Jim.
No, I was just going to say he does have some experience in the Maryland General Assembly. He worked there for a couple of years, so that's interesting. And I think to his in his favor, frankly. I see. I won't call it the inexperience of youth, but the inexperience of youth is I think where I think he suffers the most.
I think he's tying himself to some trigger topics, trying to gain voters. I think that's where I think some of his opportunity is.
Right.
You know, when he's talking about, great, he raised the alarm about the Maryland state pension system's continuing investment in risky Chinese companies which hold close ties to the Chinese Communist government.
Yeah. That's triggers.
Those are triggers. You know, those are all
those are
trigger
triggers.
words, and that's done intentionally.
Right. And we're not getting our fair share in Western Maryland.
Right. You know, like some of the things that he says here, I think if you have a good base, stand on that base. Don't try to trigger people to say, I'm the kind of person or I'm the kind of Republican that you need to elect to separate yourself. So I see a lot of that, like, and it's kind of blended in but blatant in his message from his page. So I'm not reading something, you know, third party. This is his message.
Yeah.
This is his message, and so it's done with intent.
Yeah.
So in terms of specific agenda items, he has the death by dealer legislation, which talks about making it a crime for direct or indirect distribution of heroin or fentanyl. He talks about Maryland increasing staff in the Department of Corrections. He talks about increased Maryland State Police participation in Allegheny County and Western Maryland Police Recruitment Work Group. He talks about the Second Amendment. He talks about economic development. He's talking about a MARC rail expansion.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Gotta have vision. It's grand.
yeah, I get it. Is it going to be used that much? I mean, yes, people drive from Hagerstown to D.C. Do people routinely drive from Cumberland to D.C. to work? And by the way, with remote work, how important are these rail expansions? What percentage of the population is still making that commute?
Yeah, and I think, and I would kind of play devil's advocate on that one as well, or the flip side to that, is that I would say having a MARC rail not only allows for commuting into work, into those areas, but I think it also gives people a more easier way to come out here.
Right.
You know, for entertainment venues and to build the economy. Hopefully you can build something to support that and that people want to come out here for. But again, you want to hear that. You want to hear that message. You want to hear the plan as a whole.
Yeah, he's also against speed cameras.
Well, you know, that was a hot topic a few years ago right here in Hagerstown, right?
It was indeed.
So it'll be interesting between those two. Like I said, I've just seen that he's a flamethrower. And just to clarify, those are the two candidates on the Republican side,
Correct.
right?
And has anyone heard from Senator Edwards? Who's he endorsing? Who's he backing? This
I've
is his
not
vacated
heard.
seat, correct?
Yeah, I don't believe he's endorsed yet.
So he's gonna wait till after the primaries to throw his weight behind somebody, right?
You know, from my friends in Cumberland, they believe, or in that area, whomever wins the Republican primary is going to win. That's what I'm hearing. But that leads us to our last candidate on the Democratic side, Michael
Mr.
Dresbach.
Right.
And I just saw from an article, he's actually a Washington County native,
Yes, he is.
from Williamsport. He's a small business owner. He attended Williamsport High School, Hagerstown Community College, and Frostburg State. He began his career working at Fairchild. Rose up as a union leader, and moved on with his career from there. But he's in the hospitality business in Garrett County.
Well,
He has the Savage River Lodge.
Well, you giving credit on the other side, just like we spoke about.
You got
being
another
businessman,
businessman.
and not only in the hospitality industry, right?
Yeah.
We know what the hospitality industry went through over these last couple of years with COVID, and they're still going through right now in that whole transition. So, I'm not sure where the status of his business is right now, but I think there's something to say about having an understanding of what's going on there, because we're going to need that throughout. I think one of the things that we're still suffering with and still trying to recover is the hospitality industry.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it's in his favor, in my view, that he has a business, and that he apparently a successful business.
But his business is in the most remote part, right?
It is.
Of the state.
But you know what? The most remote part of the state gets a lot of traffic. Deep
It
Creek
does.
Lake.
It does, but that traffic is normally not coming from the bordering folks, right? That
No.
traffic is coming
Yeah.
from further away. So number one, being in the reddest part of the state, I'm not sure how much traction he'll receive. But I mean, obviously, his volunteerism, his dedication to community is evident in regards to all the organizations that he is involved with. He's been a long-time volunteer of Habitat for Humanity, the past president of the Board of Visitors of the Appalachian Laboratory of the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Studies. I mean, so he has a long record, a long resume of being a community advocate and involved.
Here's a bigger question. Can Western Maryland elect a Democrat?
Not right now.
And tell me why. Because it occurs to me that, at least in Washington County, and I can't speak with authority for Allegheny or Garrett County, but at least in Washington County, if this is the far left Democrat and this is the far right Republican, our span is probably like this. Most of our candidates are centrist, and one might be a little bit more liberal, one might be a little bit more conservative, but you don't have in most cases, there are exceptions.
I think there's only one race that a Democrat can win, and that's the 2B city race, and we can talk about that later.
What about county commission? We've got
County-
Mr. Williams, and I know we talked
know
about
that
him.
I know that you like him, but I don't see that. I don't see that moving in the county. And here's the thing: the election cycle doesn't fit for Democrats, right? It doesn't matter how good of a candidate you are. Just the wave of people that are unhappy with what's happening nationally is going to bleed locally.
I hope that's not the case.
Tell me an election cycle that you've been proved wrong. Like, Democrats thought that they had a strong list of candidates 4 years ago, right, running for county commissioners. They didn't get a sniff.
Okay.
Yeah, I think midterms are difficult for Democrats right now. I think that's also systematic in the Democratic voters, right? They you look at the numbers, you don't get as many Democratic voters that actually come out in midterms traditionally, even less that come out during the primaries. So it's always going to be difficult unless that push changes. I believe the Democrats do a great job in the generals of getting out, promoting voter registration. Like, I'm not even hearing as much about voter registration that I have in prior years right now, because you have to create a culture of coming out and voting in the midterms. And knowing this is a ongoing obstacle, at least I like to see a little bit more push behind it.
I'd like to see more push behind voting and voter registration on both sides.
Oh, absolutely.
We
Absolutely.
definitely need that. I mean, obviously, our county is a laggard, and obviously, if you shrink that down in the city limits, it gets even worse.
Yes, it does.
But I believe, poverty and poor election turnout. I think those two things, there's a correlation there.
And not saying that just because you're registered as a Democrat, you have to vote a Democrat, or because you're registered as a Republican,
Right.
you have to vote Republican either. But, unfortunately, the trend is always leaning towards what you're registered is how you traditionally vote, which again is something I think we should also
We
be
do a
working to
disservice,
change.
yes.
Yep.
So that race is going to be interesting to see how that moves. But again, talking with my folks up in that area, they believe whoever wins between McKay and Shade easily takes Edwards' seat and kind of continues his legacy. And that's the thing that we have to keep a lookout for, right? Who does Edwards endorse? Because if he does endorse in the primary, that very well could tip the race.
Yeah. It absolutely could.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Well, gentlemen, I know that we want to talk about the next race, District 2, which is more local to us. But how about if we take a break and we come back and talk about that after?
Perfect.
All right.
All right.
Stay with us. We will talk about now our local race coming back after the break, District 2. Welcome back to the show. We're picking up our election coverage with talking about District 2. District 2 right now has Senator Paul Quarterman as the incumbent. And if my memory serves me correctly, this is the first time he's going before the voters in this role.
In this role, yes.
Because Senator Serafini stepped down.
Correct.
And he took over for the rest of the session. Jim, what say you?
Yeah, I'm a Paul Quarterman fan, and I'm not at all shy about saying that. If you've watched his page on Facebook, I think that most of the money that he has helped to bring back for our county are for very legitimate, needed elements. Some will argue about the baseball stadium. I know that, but I'm trusting that, number one, the people that are going to run it, and number two, everybody else has done their homework, and that's a reasonable investment. He has brought, you want to talk about the fair share, we've gotten more than our fair share as a result of Paul Quarterman's efforts, in my view.
Well, his crowning achievement, right, was getting the stadium across the finish line, right? I just remember we were sitting here with less than a month left in session a year ago, and we thought that was dead.
Right.
And then things happened, and it came through.
I can say this, that I've worked closely with Senator Quarterman, even when he was Delegate Quarterman as well. He's been given a leg up in becoming delegate as well as becoming senator, because he got some on-the-job training that allowed him to really understand and move, but also gave him a short window to prove himself as well in that position. Right. I've had no problem with working with him, picking up the phones via email. No matter what, he's been receptive to have a conversation, which is key. But I'm not saying I always agree. I know that he had a stance more so towards prison reform and prison issues and releasing prisoners into the community and that kind of thing. That was a few years back around being a delegate.
He wanted prisoners released back to their home community.
Right, and there was some miscommunication of whether or not that was happening or not, or pointing towards one or two issues that triggered others to think that it was a much larger issue than what it was. But yet we had a good conversation about it.
Right.
Sometimes you have to agree just to disagree. But at the same time, I still support his safe neighborhoods. I support his growth and economic development. I think he stepped up to the plate with the stadium, because like we said, like that stadium deal was on its last leg. We were coming out of COVID. It was like, no way this can actually happen. And if he had failed, it would have been his failure.
Yeah.
And so it didn't. So he gets to reap the reward of his success, as well as over $20 million that he brought into the area during this legislative session. So I think he's a very strong candidate. Outside of that last minute opposer that came into the race, I thought he was going to run unopposed. I thought it was going to be very hard for anyone, Republican or Democrat, to kind of step up and take him on for this year.
Well, here's what I'll say. I think Senator Quarterman is the biggest beneficiary in this community of the farm system that the Republicans have created, right, of moving people in position, right? Because he's been able to stair-step his way to the top because of that farm system that they've created. The other thing that he has is that a tremendous advantage is, you know, Senator Serafini still cares deeply about this community and does a lot of things, probably not at the pace when he was in Annapolis, but he is still working hard on behalf of this community. So he has that mentorship and that connector of relationships behind him. You know, the things that Senator Quarterman has brought to the community in regards to a dollars and cents standpoint, you know, has been impressive, right? It's been broad-based.
It has been absolutely broad-based.
Right. It's
across
across the county.
Exactly right.
In regards to that. So, and that's impressive. You know, in regards to our efforts, you know, late in the session, we went directly to Governor Hogan with a direct ask for the Johnson Street community. We put a letter on his, you know, on Governor Hogan's desk within 6 to 8 hours. I don't even know if it was that long, maybe 4 hours. Senator Quarterman and his office has drafted a letter to go to Governor Hogan in support of what we were looking to do in the community. So we were very appreciative of that from a personal perspective in regards to what he's done. But I'm still pushing because there's more that his name should be on within the community, and we really, you know, we still need to diversify that portfolio of what he's bringing home, and we're going to be working hard with him to make sure that that happens.
Well, there's always a next need. I mean,
Yes.
there's no doubt about that, and some of them are very important, and I'm not discounting any of those. But, you know, just looking at a couple of the wins from across our county, Boonesboro, $1 million for a reservoir, $200,000 for Chase 6 Boulevard and Campus Avenue realignment, $150,000 for Boonesboro wastewater treatment plant, $125,000 for community development. I mean, that's just in our little borough of Boonesboro. And then you take that and look at some of the things that happened outside of Boonesboro. Smithsburg, for example.
Smithsburg received money.
$4 million for street improvements, $500,000 for Smithsburg High School athletic facilities, $400,000 for Fort Ritchie History Museum. You know, history is a huge thing in this county. And the fact that we have the History Museum, the fact that, as you mentioned, we're going to have the Aviation Museum, and they got, what, $5 million?
Yeah.
Is what I remember. $5 million for the Aviation Museum, $3.5 million for the Washington County Museum of Fine Arts. That's going to bring tourism into Washington County. Those are people that we don't have to worry about paying pensions or any of that stuff. They're just going to come here, they're going to spend their money, and they're going to go back home. $2 million for Boys and Girls Club. We talked to them. Does anybody disagree that that's a great achievement? $500,000 for the fire department, $500,000 for the Robert W. Johnson Community Center, and $250,000 for the Clara Barton Memorial. And the list goes on. That's just two of the communities in our, two of the municipalities in our community, and there's more.
And again, that was amazing because, you know, the state's wallet was open and he kept showing up in line, you know, to bring money back home.
But he showed up with projects that made sense for the state.
Right. Absolutely.
You know, that's the thing that I like about Hogan. And quite frankly, you know, as much as we talk about a divided house in the state, in Annapolis, the reality is when you come with common sense projects, there is a chance that you you will get them funded, especially when you are a legislator like Paul Quarterman is, that works both sides of the aisle.
And I can say this as well, and there's some things that may never show up because they were attached to a direct money, but when we went after the historic tax credit, you know, he sat on the commission, he spoke up in support of the work that we were doing with Preservation Maryland to advocate for the historic tax credit, which also brings jobs and helps with preservation as well. And that's something he just used his voice to kind of co-sign on in those committee meetings when others was testifying. That's not going to show up anywhere, right? So it's some of those things with being in that position has afforded him those opportunities to build those relationships. And that's why I said, honestly, it's going to be difficult. And it was going to be difficult for anyone to really step up and challenge him this year for this election. I think he kind of sealed it after this legislation session.
Well, and I'll say this: there's something that I saw in Paul that had nothing to do with the Annapolis and legislation that impressed me. He took a lot of shots from the city. Al Shire attacked him on several occasions. Al Shire attacked him to his face in a city council meeting, told him to shut up and sit down, and attacked him. And then there was another meeting that he was not at where he was accusing him and Brenda of working against the city's interest. And, you know, those are circumstances that you could see that someone could get petty, right? Ego could get in the way, and you could become petty and deal with that, because we see a lot of that out of our city government, a lot of pettiness. But he chose not to be petty. He chose to rise above it and continue to look at what's going to be good for the community.
Well, you talk about a house divided, but Senator Quarterman also sat in that seat as a city council member not too long ago as well.
True.
So I think he has some insight. He also has some personal relationship, because, you know, you think about, he sat on city council with the mayor when she was a city council woman. They actually were elected together. He sat with under Brucci when he was actually mayor at that time as well.
Shire.
He sat down with Al Shire as well. So I think that's a difficult job, right? To come back after you've had your political career take two major steps forward and come back and work with individuals that you've worked with in the past. So is it some personal stuff? I can't imagine it wouldn't be, right? You know, it should be favorable. Sometimes it's not. So that's something else to balance as you work through negotiating some of these large deals to bring money into the city, right? Because it's difficult to put aside your personal feelings and say, I'm not going to bring money in and hurt an entire city, right? Because of personal one-on-one relationships.
Right.
And we will hope that doesn't happen. And he's proven that he hasn't allowed that to happen.
Because there was a lot of threats being made. I mean, there was threats that the city wasn't going to provide the parking garage.
Right.
That complement the stadium. It was just a lot of shots being thrown. You know, and all of this was happening deep in the session, but he stayed focused and delivered for the community. So that's a kudos to him for that.
And by the way, let us not forget the $1.5 billion retirement tax relief package that he co-sponsored over the next 5 years.
And I think he has a personality that hopefully can heal some relationships, and a willingness to do so as well.
Right.
So I think no matter how tense things may have been, I think with him, he's shown that he has the ability to rebuild some of those bridges.
Yeah, and you know, the city's going to have to work with him this legislative session.
Yes, they are. To
get more of their needs, you know, met, obviously in regards to the indoor turf arena, right? Because we have I guess we'll call it a partial tear down of the stadium, but all the funding is not there to complete that project, and they're going to have to go back to Annapolis, and they're going to need his advocacy.
Right, and their needs should be our needs, right? Because anything that doesn't come back home from Annapolis, affects the entire area, especially his specific district as well.
Right.
So that's why those relationships are important. That's why voters should also take in consideration, those relationships, because
who's working together?
We're the
who's
constituents.
willing to work together?
Right. We're the constituents. We're the one impacted by the decisions made by those we elect to represent us.
Yeah. Now on the other side, he does not have a Republican challenger.
Nope.
But he does have a challenger on the Democratic side.
Maybe.
Possibly. We have retired Frederick Police Department Lieutenant Sean Perry on the Democratic side, but he has encountered a little difficulty. Terrence, I'm going to go to you to speak to that.
I was a little torn when this first came out, right? I seen it as a communication that came out from Senator Quarterman's party, kind of stating that this candidate does not meet the requirements to actually be running because he didn't live in the district within a specified time frame. And I believe he lives there now, but you had to be there within a specified time frame to actually be considered as a candidate. And as we record today, I believe the Board of Elections were reviewing that and whether or not he was going to be removed. But he was printed on the ballot because the ballots, I believe, actually had to be printed this week.
Right.
So he is there, and I'm not sure what happens with the ballot if something changes, if there's a future ruling, and the Board of Elections has opted to respond to that until a ruling was actually made. And I'm going back to what I was saying. I was a little torn because I didn't think Quarterman had to do it. I don't think he had to come out with it. I don't think he had to personally voice it. I think this is...
But he made it a lawsuit, so it wasn't just voicing it.
Right, right.
He's the only one that could have... He was the only person that had standing in a lawsuit, correct?
I'm
It's
not
the
a
party,
lawyer.
isn't it? I believe
I'm
it
not
may
a
be
lawyer.
the party.
I can't
Okay.
speak to
I
that.
can't.
but-
I can't.
I mean,
speak
what
to
you're
it.
saying makes sense, but I can't speak with authority.
And
about it.
listen, I am not a lawyer by any stretch, but I did stay at a Holiday Inn last night.
There you go.
So there you go.
There you go.
We get some sponsorship for that. So I believe I don't believe, again, that kind of muddies the water, right? You gotta look at people kind of perception of it. But again, I believe he had a commanding lead. If he is removed, then he runs unopposed. And I would also like to know what that does as far as registering as a vote as a candidate now, because if you run unopposed, I believe even after the deadline, there's 30 days where someone can actually be in opposition of you in the other party. So does that open back up if that happens? And if it does someone step up to take over that mantle? So I believe that early controversy around this candidate right now is only going to hurt them. And I think it's going to be hard to recover from that, even if the ruling goes, in this candidate in Mr. Perry's favor.
Well, here's the thing, and let's assume he's running. There's not a lot out here that talks about what he stands for.
No, that's what I was going to say, Reggie. He doesn't. I have not found a web page. I'm not saying he doesn't have one.
He's been running around on the Democratic circuit.
Yep.
And taking pictures with all the influential people.
Right.
That he
including
sees
the former governor.
Including the former governor.
Yeah.
But none of that speaks to a true campaign. And I know he has some backing from the Democratic Central Committee, but who's the last person that the Democratic Central Committee got elected?
Yeah.
And I would also say this. He did do an interview with the Baltimore Sun. And in his interview, he does talk to a lot of the issues of things that he's going to support. It's the first.
But how many people are going to see that?
That was going to be my. That was going to be my question.
You found it on your Google machine.
Yes, but my thing is, I agree. I believe if you're a candidate, you got to get out there in front of people. You got to have these conversations.
Yeah. And it's not anyone's responsibility but his to get his issues out.
Absolutely.
And whether that's on Facebook or a
web
webpage.
I believe he's behind the ball, right? Because you're running against the incumbent with a track record.
With a big track record.
Right?
Yeah.
Of bringing dollars in. And you know what Quarterman's campaign's been? Every day I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the millions of dollars that have come to Washington County.
Yep.
That's his campaign right
And you
there.
know what? That's pretty effective.
It is pretty effective, right? Yeah, let me tell you a little bit more about the millions of dollars that came here.
While at the same time saving $1.5 billion in tax relief
So
for
if you're
retirees.
running against that, like I don't know what the Baltimore Sun
You got to be
article does for you.
150%.
I
And
don't
how
see
many
a
people in
website.
Washington County read the Baltimore Sun? Either online or,
Terrence only reads it when he's in it.
I know. I read the Baltimore Sun.
I mean, clearly he is pro-law enforcement and has some very strong opinions there.
Right.
And there are a couple other things that I noticed in his Facebook page that I agree with, frankly, on the whole. I just don't see enough of it. I don't see enough.
Especially for someone that's unknown.
Right. And for me, I am his critical voter because I am the person. And this may not be the race for that because I am a huge Quarterman fan. But normally, if you're going to sway somebody, it's going to be somebody like me who is registered one way but doesn't always vote that way.
Right.
Right?
Again, I'll give the flip side. I think he has some very strong answers. Listen to his responses. But if a tree falls and no one's there to hear it, then did it make a sound, right? And I think that's where he's missing this opportunity. Being a former police commander, having some background in law enforcement, he's also served as the human resource commander. He really speaks to some of the equity and policing and some of those issues as well, and talk about transparency and accountability. He has some ideas of grandeur maybe outside of his role when they ask about inflation, and he's pretty much says he'll fight to ensure that corporations are not raising prices just to increase their bottom line or profit. Good luck on that.
No, but here's that one. How do you affect that from a state Senate seat?
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. That those are ideas of grandeur. I think you can have a position on some of those things, but I don't see how that really drives home what is going to be impacted by this district. And I think a lot of his answers don't really hone in on the district. I think they're very somewhat general. They're talking larger scale, maybe state or even nationally, national issues, but the questions weren't as direct either. But again,
you're being nice. You're being nice because if you look at these answers, you would not know that he was running for something in Washington County because he's really not talking about the district.
But this is where my concern is. Does he understand it? Right? Is he aware of it? He's made comments that he's learning right now on the campaign trail.
Right.
Yeah, and that may be just an unfortunate choice of words because, no, actually, maybe it's not. He should be learning.
Right.
But he should have a good foundation of knowledge. And it shouldn't be a surprise to him, some of these issues. And I'm not saying it is. I'm just saying that the foundational issues, he's got to get that word out or he doesn't have a chance. He's running against a powerhouse who is...
But the problem is that, again, you're seeing him address these issues in the Baltimore Sun.
Right.
Not locally, not on his Facebook page, not on a website.
Right.
So, like, the people that really need to see this are not seeing it. Now, they very well may go with their Google machines and find it now that they've heard it on the flip side, your number one source for political information in 2022. That was a pretty good commercial.
I like that.
Yeah. But other than that, I mean, who would know this was out here? Because, again, Terrence just found it 5 minutes ago.
Well, and I'm not quite sure that doing the only interview you give at this point in the election cycle is to the Baltimore Sun. I'm not sure that's a game winner because that could turn people off.
And these answers, I can almost guarantee these aren't spoken answers. These are written responses. But just as easily, this is a copy and paste and a Canva graphic that you could be putting out day by day on really where you stand and really pushing that out. As far as marketing and celebrating your campaign, like that's. I'm just saying. Take the tip. It's easy work, right? You take these answers, you drop it in a post, you put your image up there, and you share it and you get it out there, and then you open up conversation about it and let people hear you speak to it. Because a lot of these things here also are aligned with Senator Quarterman, right? You talk about MARC train transportation, but Senator Quarterman has actually put an effort and bills in to support that work. So how do you speak to that, but speak differently about it, because if that's the case, if you were voting, would you vote for Senator Quarterman, right? You got to ask the candidate that. So those are the kind of things I believe he really needs to work on, getting his voice out there. And learning is one thing, but being public is another. You got to learn on your own time in running a campaign. But when you're around the people, or when you're actually speaking out, you don't speak about learning, you speak about what you learned.
Right.
And what you plan on doing about it.
But the elephant in the room is that, Quarterman filed a petition that he lived outside the district. And yesterday, the judge delayed the hearing to give him an opportunity to get representation, because I believe he had just received the summons on Friday. So we very well may be in a situation that
There is no
candidate.
Right.
Quarterman keeps to keep all of his coins in his pocket, and then he can go full-fledged to support his Republican delegate, Brenda.
Yeah. And I say this too. When you're running, if you're not going to win, then make your opposition accountable. I think he talks to a lot of information around equity, around race relations. If you know you're not going to win, at least be in position to ask the question and speak to it, and make your opposer start to speak to it as well. If you're going to know you're going to have to bow out, leave a mark.
Yeah, but there are very few people, I think, that run for political office that run thinking I'm not going to win, or even that reach that conclusion much
But
before
I want
election
a more
day.
conscious electorate.
Yeah, I agree with you. For sure.
Well, we'll see. I would imagine by next week or so we'll know if we have a race or if we don't have a race.
Yeah.
So.
Learn something new every day.
But again, it's an uphill climb anyway, right? I mean, let's be honest about this, right? It's an uphill climb based on the fact of someone that hasn't lived in the district, is just getting to know the district, does not have name recognition broadly in the community that he's trying to serve.
Running against a powerhouse.
And running against someone that's kind of worked their way up through the ranks, through the farm system of the Republican
Who has
Party.
name recognition, not only him, but his family in Washington County.
Yeah.
And good approval ratings, if you polled everyone, right? You would assume that across the board that he has strong approval ratings. And he shows up and he's present, so.
Yeah. And, what does Hogan do with his war chest?
Run for president.
I mean, does he spread a little money out to his candidates to keep Maryland strong in places that?
Yeah, I don't know.
Well, that's a discussion for another day. So, good talk, gentlemen. But we have some more races to cover.
Not this week.
Not this week. But in future weeks, we definitely have some more races to cover. I mean, obviously we got through District 1 and 2, and then next week I would imagine we will move on and talk about the others and work our way through the rest of the county races. But we'll leave it there for tonight. Well, that's all the time that we have for tonight. We hope that you'll like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and send us your comments to feedback@theflipsidetv.com. That is feedback@theflipsidetv.com. But most importantly, we hope you join us again next week for another episode of The Flip Side.